Welcome to the Responsible Supply Chain Show, where we explore the world of responsible sourcing and resilient supply chains. I'm your host, Justin Dillon, and in each episode, we dive into real stories from some of the world's best business, government, and thought leaders protecting people, planet, and profits. Let's get it. Okay, so in today's episode, we speak with Tu Rinsche. Tu has held leadership roles at places you never heard of, like Disney, Marriott, HP, Starbucks, where she helped develop human rights strategies. She also worked at the State Department, and that is where we first met. We're going to be speaking about how some of the biggest companies in the world are implementing human rights due diligence systems in their supply chain. She's really good at it. She's kind of got the trifecta going. She's worked at like the charity NGO sector. She's obviously worked for government, and she's held influential positions at publicly traded companies. That is a lot of face shifting. That is something that I would call soft power. Soft power, in my opinion, is a superpower. Why? Because I don't have it. I don't have soft power skills. Here's the definition. Soft power is the ability to co-opt rather than coerce. It involves shaping the preferences of others through appeal and attraction. Okay, maybe I have some of that, but what I don't have is the ability to do that inside of bureaucracies or systems. That is very difficult for me to do. And I actually have an immense amount of respect for people who can do that, because I would lose my patience very quickly. But soft power really is a superpower. It's the ability to turn bureaucratic BS into something beautiful. So let's get into our interview with Starbucks and Disney alum Tu Rinsche. Tu, good to see you. Where am I finding you today?
Hi, Justin. I am based in the DC area.
How long have you always been there?
I've been here forever.
Yeah?
So I went to GW for undergrad and kind of just stayed on the East Coast, but originally from California, like you. Yeah.
I'm so happy to talk to you, because I just, it's a crazy week and I have lots of questions, and I'm just expecting you to answer all of those. So thank you for being here. My first question is, what are companies thinking right now in regards to supply chain responsibility, given all the trade and tariff saber rattling that are happening? Any quick wisdom you can offer our listeners?
I think there's just a lot going on. I think what companies are thinking about is probably meeting compliance.
Yeah.
Kind of just the bare minimum, right? And waiting to see kind of what happens with what's happening with the geopolitical issues. So I think it's probably smart to wait, but definitely meeting minimum compliance. There's a lot of various regulations regarding supply chain responsibility, as you know, Justin. And I think that some of them are active and some of them are yet to, be enforced. So I think it's kind of a focus on those that apply now, and then obviously put in place what is needed in the longer term.
How many companies do you think know what the minimum is? Because I completely understand you don't want to do more than you need to. Do you have any sense that companies actually know what the minimum is for them?
I would hope that companies are smart about it and they are engaging their legal counsel as well as their supply chain teams, procurement teams to better understand, one, are they in scope for various laws? Obviously, here in the U.S. for American companies, as you know, the 1930 Tariff Act applies to all companies with regards to prohibiting forced labor.
Yeah.
Some of these other laws that are outside of the U.S., that's probably a bigger question, but certainly there are organizations out there, particularly nonprofit organizations, that are very critical of companies and, with good reasons. So they do have tools in place now to identify companies that should be in scope, right? And one group that's doing that is SOMO, which is a European nonprofit. They actually just released, I think recently, a what's called a CSDDD data hub, where they've identified thousands of companies that would be in scope.
So if you work at a company, you're like, I wonder if the CSDDD applies to me, just Google that in SOMO.
I would go into that tool. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think when you have so much noise, it can become a bit of a paralysis of analysis. And also, this is boring stuff. I don't think it's any. I just learned this week. I don't think it's any. And by boring, I mean strategically. Like, I, it seems like Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a timeless movie, so I'm not even worried about aging myself. I can do that any other time. But I mean, it is interesting that the director of that movie chose to use this 1930s tariff act as the material that the teacher is teaching in class that's putting everyone to sleep, and where we get the famous
I did
line,
not know
where
that.
we get the
That's actually
you
a
know that
fun
whole like
fact.
it's a meme now or an audio meme like Bueller. It's relevant today because of some of what's going on using tariffs during the Depression to be able to protect American interests. Actually, I think the over under on that is it didn't quite work. That's not an indication of anything that's happening right now, but this has been tried before. But one of the provisions, this is wild, but one of the provisions in that act was it allowed for the importation of goods made with slavery if you couldn't produce it here in the United States, which is just, if you think of the mindset 100 years ago, it's just crazy that was in there. Uh, the Obama, I remember working with State Department back in the day. That's when you and I met. I think you're still at State. And I remember working with, I remember getting a call from the White House saying, hey, we're excited about the work everyone's doing here. We're going to do something really exciting. We're going to close a loophole in this 1930s Tariff Act. And I'm like, what a nothing burger. That sounds like, that sounds like nothing's going to happen. And from that, what do I know? I'm not a lawyer. I mean, you know, loopholes are in tariff acts seem like a big deal, and that has created the legal framework for UFLPA and WROs and affecting companies all over the place. So when you think of U.S. importers, and this show, you know, reaches, you know, people all over the world, but U.S. importers right now are just drinking from a straw. They don't know what to follow. Any guidance for them other than just stay tuned, because that seems to be the message we're getting.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point. I mean, when, the consumptive demand provision was removed, that made a huge difference,
Mm.
right? Now, all of a sudden, um, it was open-ended, right? That any company importing products made with potential forced labor or child labor, that was prohibited. And I think what was really powerful was the enforcement side of things.
Mm.
To your comment earlier, where like nothing really happened, probably true. Like progress was really slow. But when enforcement started to happen under CBP, and they were given the authority to enforce, the 1930 Tariff Act, and in particular, forced labor, that made a huge difference. When cases started coming in, when they started communicating on their websites which companies were on, XYZ lists, that made a difference.
Yeah.
So I think we are starting to see things changing. We are starting to see things moving in a direction that, let's say before, it was like nice to have human rights programs,
Sure.
right? It was nice to have a responsible sourcing program and maybe a team. Nowadays, it's mandated. So the fact that it's mandated, there are regulations specific to ESG, to human rights due diligence, and in particular, even to forced labor or child labor specific issues, right? Companies must take action.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of things that they can do. Obviously, it varies quite a bit depending on your maturity level, kind of where you're at, what are material issues to you, what your supply chain is like, right? But as long as you're a company that's importing a product outside the US, these are issues that you should care about. Absolutely.
Because they're a cost to your business, not just a cost to your reputation.
Absolutely.
You have the absolute authority and ethos to be able to speak into this. You have worked in government, in nonprofits, and in some of the biggest companies in the world on every side around supply chain responsibility, whether it be climate or primarily you've worked quite a bit on forced labor. So you've got this very unique view of you've been quote unquote in the room of a lot of different types of rooms. That gives you that has to give you some level of superpowers to be able to have like superpower, diplomacy. I mean, to be at the State Department, to be at Disney, to be at Marriott, be at no, you weren't Amazon, Marriott, Starbucks. Sorry, that's what I was thinking. Right. I mean, you've been in a lot of different places, and then also going to work in the and being on boards in the NGO side. Tell me a little bit about how that's changed your perspective. Because most people they've just worked at a company. They don't know what goes on, how the sausage is made at the State Department
Mhm.
or inside of a nonprofit. How does that give you a unique view into these problems?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've actually thought about that quite a bit. I think having worked inside and outside of companies has provided me with certainly a well-rounded perspective on human rights, and also reinforced to me that every stakeholder has a critical and important role to play to
Mm,
advance progress,
mm,
right? It's not just one stakeholder. It's not just the company. It's not just the NGO. It's a lot of different stakeholders that need to be part of the solution. And each is unique in their capabilities if we want to achieve real and lasting positive impact. So,
mm.
for example, like a nonprofit or civil society organization, they can't fully implement their programs without the support of the government institutions and the governance around that, right?
Right.
And equally important is civil society and business should see each other as companions versus adversaries on human rights. And I would say 10 years ago, it was kind of sensitive to
Yeah.
have companies and, these activists or advocates be in the same room.
Yeah.
It was tense. A lot of folks didn't want to talk about these issues. They are ugly issues.
Yeah.
But nowadays we are seeing a change in attitude. I'm really happy to see that, like the naming and shaming,
Yeah.
while I think calling out and keeping companies accountable is critically important, the attitude is changing towards let's work together to find solutions. And I think that is the right approach, right? And so working within a company for me, is really exciting being in a house. At least, I think so.
Yeah.
Because you can get very hands-on with internal policies and politics and navigating bureaucracy
Right.
and, influencing decision makers. And then, of course, the fun part, which maybe some people think is boring, but integrating human rights principles into business practices.
Ooh,
It
you
sounds
tell us more.
easy,
Tell
but
us about
it's
the fun
not.
part. What does that mean? What does that look like in a company integrating that? Tell us more.
For me, it's really about how do you influence with very little authority or power? Oftentimes, the human rights person, like myself, probably the least powerful person inside the company, right? Um, but, it's about engaging with the right folks to be able to get what needs to be done on human rights. I mean, I'm still learning every day, even though I've been around for some time
Yeah.
working on these issues. I think one of my most valuable lessons is really identifying champions and internal partners who can help you engage with leadership, in particular with the C-suite,
Okay.
right? And in
Also,
so many of my
we're all
yeah, in
about
so many of my roles, I would say that serving as the company's human rights officer or expert,
yeah.
I have very limited authority and power, and I wouldn't be able to do my job well without the partnership of the C-suite, so executive leadership, as well as senior executives who engage with their peers to be able to bring them on board and get buy-in, right? So, for example, across the various companies I've worked in, I've partnered with a chief human resources officer, chief communications officer, chief policy officers, and those are the folks who are going to actually be able to help do the embedding.
Yeah. I appreciate that you say you don't have a lot of power. You've got a lot done for someone who didn't have a lot of power. I'm just going to let's just be
Thank you.
super clear. I can see your resume. I'm looking at it. It's like, okay, that's even more impressive. You didn't have power. So clearly your superpower is diplomacy. We've heard companies say, hey, thank you, Freedom, for the data you provided in our supply chain. We can see things we've never seen before. We're seeing some challenges. The problem is, I can't change it. I can't cancel the contract. I can't prioritize this. This is a strategic supplier. So now we've got another problem. What advice would you give for people in that case? And I think I know where you're heading, but what advice would you give for someone whose job it is to go find problems, but doesn't have the power to fix them?
Yeah. So I face that all the time.
Okay, that's good. I'm the right person.
So
Great.
we're in good company. Um, I would say getting executive and corporate buy-in is really challenging, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're kind of working on human rights, you're generally, again, like I said, have the least influence. You probably have the smallest team. You certainly don't have the budget to any of this work, so it's really hard.
Mm.
But along the way, what I've learned, some basics include you need to speak the language of business, right?
Mm.
In terms of return on investment, risk and reputation. Like it's so critically important to develop a strong business case. So
Mm.
for example, highlighting how human rights risks expose a company to legal, financial, and operational risks. And I think,
Yep.
the work that you do with Freedom does that really well,
Yep.
right? The other is scare them a little bit, right?
Ooh.
There are lawsuits. Companies are getting sued
Yep.
as
Yep.
a result of human rights,
Yep.
not complying with human rights, right? And then there's also real concrete impact, supply chain disruptions.
Yep.
Imagine that your product can't get into where it needs to be
Mm.
because of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're not going to have product,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And then, of course, the big one is regulatory penalties. We're seeing that there are big financial fines
Yep.
for non-compliance. I think number two is also emphasizing how consumers, so if you're a consumer facing
Sure.
company, investors, if you're a public company, obviously your business partners, and then of course your employees, they expect ethical, responsible business practices, including responsible sourcing,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so failure to act can potentially damage brand trust and reputation. So um, reputation is so critically important for, again, a global brand.
Yep.
Um, and I would say number three is, show how leading companies, so those who may be a bit more sophisticated around human rights, are using responsible sourcing as a differentiator, right?
Huh.
To drive customer loyalty or even
Yep.
long-term profitability. And what we're seeing now, and there's plenty of studies on this, is that younger generations today are asking tough questions, right?
Mm.
They want to know that the products they are buying and consuming are ethically made. I know my kids are asking me that,
Right.
and they're part of the alpha generation.
Right.
So these are young kids,
Yeah.
and they know what's happening, right? They're not, I think, this is pretty basic stuff, so they kind of know what's right and wrong pretty easily. The other area where I have found to
Huh.
be really useful as someone who's a practitioner is leverage external pressures, such as investor and regulatory,
Yeah.
right? And then I think industry benchmarks are super useful.
Mm.
So I often share kind of what I know about upcoming laws that could impose penalties. So a
Yep.
big one is CSDDD,
Yep.
right? And we know that the penalties
Yep.
are
They're
pretty
real.
significant
Yeah.
and they're real.
Yeah.
And right now, I think it states in the regulation that it should be no less than 5% of the company's global
That
turnover.
could be your entire profit margin.
That
Yeah.
could be
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
big,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you're a public company, I think another piece of information to make the business case that's really important is around sharing shareholder resolutions and investor inquiries
Yeah.
with cross-functional teams as well as leadership. Understanding these are the types of questions that investors are asking,
Well,
and they are human rights related as
can I
well.
push into that a little bit? Because again, we're all here to just sit at your feet and pull secrets out of your experience. But at Freedom, we're getting calls from like private equity firms. The investor community is coming to us saying we want to start understanding the supply chain of our portfolios or companies we're investing in because it's a material risk. So that's real. That's happening. That you can just do a Google search and start looking at private equity supply chain risk, and you're going to start to see stuff. Is the C-suite aware of this? That's my question. Are they aware that this is in general? I know you can't see everything, but in general, are they aware that this is starting to dig in? Because that seems like that would get their attention.
Yeah, I would say from my experience, kind of where I have sat, this information does come to the
Mm.
C-suite, absolutely, right? Again, probably for companies that maybe have the capacity
Yeah.
to handle these types of inquiries. So that it is increasing. And I would say you're absolutely spot on, Justin. Like these firms, investors, private equity, they're getting smarter.
Yep.
They're actually even hiring people on their teams who know a thing or two about ESG and human rights, right?
Yeah.
And they're asking really good questions. And I would say to every company I've been at, I've had to engage with investor relations and those teams to help them navigate some of these questions that they're
Yeah.
getting from their stakeholders. So absolutely. I think that would be an area where, again, leveraging those external pressures would be really helpful to get the attention of C-suite, including the CEO.
Yeah, it seems like, and this is one of my favorite things about the work you get to do is that you get to, I feel like we get to do, I guess, is it jujitsu where you're using the opponent's force against, like, we get to use more market forces to do good things for companies. And like, because I can totally argue that a more responsible, transparent, resilient supply chain is a value add to the company, even without all the great things it does in the world. And I agree, if we don't get better at making those arguments and making those cases, the stick as opposed to the carrot of regulations and fees and all the rest, that certainly helps. But I think that there's a carrot here as well that sometimes just gets missed in all of the challenges. Have you got any tips that you can give when it comes to, hey, while this may not be us that's doing it as a company, our responsibility is that we make sure that the companies we're doing business with are sharing their responsibility. Like, how do you communicate that upwards?
Yeah, I think, the language of human rights, like you said, isn't the most accessible,
No.
right? So like most people have no idea what I mean when I say I work in human rights. They're like, what? What is
Yeah.
that? Like, you mean like you're helping people out of poverty? I'm like, not exactly, but that would be an ideal outcome, right? So I appreciate this point because it does get to the point of like, what is this? What is this work and how do you communicate it to people who may not be as versed
Hmm.
in this language? And so for me, I think another way to look at this work and the work that I certainly do is to frame it as risk mitigation and management, because that's really kind of what it is at the end of the day,
Hmm.
right? So generally human rights work is viewed as a cost. I don't make any money for the company. I actually spend money.
Sure.
And so that's not a positive. But I would argue that, of course, it adds tremendous value, right? By one, avoiding legal and compliance costs, as we kind of mentioned earlier.
Sure.
Two, reducing reputational damage on behalf of the company.
Right.
Three, providing supply chain stability and resilience,
Right.
right? And then four, and I've seen this actually in a number of different programs that I've invested in as a donor and funder, is lowering turnover and absenteeism. When workers feel that they have worked with dignity and they
Hmm.
are respected, guess what? They're going to show up, right? And they're going to
Yep.
be happy about it.
Yep.
So I think that there's absolutely a competitive advantage um, for a company to invest in human rights, and being able to, again, make that business case, speak the language of the executive of your business, of your company, to then be able to communicate all this value add,
Yeah.
right? And I love the MasterCard Priceless campaign. And I think that illustrates really well, like the value of human rights, that it really is priceless.
Yeah, it is.
Um,
How do you sell people on the idea of uh, progress, not perfection? Because when it comes to human rights, you want a perfect record, not an okay record. And there are no such things. There's no, and that's really hard to get people's head around is, yeah, there's no perfect supply chain. There's no slave-free supply chain. I'm sorry, no matter how hard you try, uh, it is pervasive. But there is a better, there is a responsible supply chain. There are ways,
yeah.
there are thresholds that you can meet. Is there more of an audience for that at the C-suite level, that, hey, we don't have to be perfect, but we can just demonstrate that we're making progress over time? Because that didn't exist 5, 6 years ago. It's like, I want to either be perfect or do nothing. And it seems like we've got a little bit more uh, aperture for progress. But I'm wondering, if that's my theory, I'm wondering if you're seeing that as well.
So it's about making progress over time, especially if you're required to report on it publicly.
Mm.
And I would say that people want to hear the company story, right? What did you do? How did you improve? Or how
Mm.
did you do it differently?
Yeah.
They're not going to want to read the same story over and over, year after year.
Mm.
They're going to expect that there will be changes, that there will be some progress being made in little ways.
Yeah.
So I would say there's no finish line for this work. It is a constant.
Yeah.
And so companies need to get started sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
and or wait until there's a compliance deadline. But making progress is key.
It's hard because we're all humans and we put stuff off
Hmm.
if we don't feel like we have to. But I agree with you. It does pay dividends to get started earlier. I want to talk a little bit more about power. And I was talking about a little bit earlier about, using jujitsu to change or power jujitsu. Um, you've been doing this for a while, and you've had titles, or you've had the terms human rights and titles long before it was where everyone has it. How have you seen your power meter grow over the last 10 to 15 years? I would imagine it was kind of like somewhat low, but like this has become an increasingly important role. Have you seen that your power inside, and you can speak, you don't have to speak specifically, but have you seen the power of roles like yours increase over the last 10 years?
I've definitely seen a trend. And I think that one of it is compliance related, right?
Mm,
There are regulations that do ask, do you have who is accountable for human rights?
mm,
Do you have a dedicated team member or director responsible for human rights?
yeah.
So I think that certainly encourages this trend to establish roles dedicated for human rights. But I would say every company should invest in a human rights team, whatever they may call it, whether it's their responsible sourcing team, whether it's a human rights officer.
Yeah.
They need to invest in human rights,
Yeah.
um, expertise. Another way that I've seen kind of this grow and influence is really around the engagement of consultants around human rights,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of human rights consultants. So I do see
Is that a good
that
thing?
that space has grown a lot.
It,
I would say that if, you know,
no
there are
shade.
pros and cons, right?
No
So I know
shade. No shade. Yeah.
Steve Jobs at Apple had really
Yeah.
negative
Yeah.
perspective about consultants, but I think that there's value there.
Well,
Again,
yeah,
it depends.
because we're afraid of not having the knowledge internally, right? And so I can see why consultants have had a
Hmm.
heyday in this,
Yes,
and all power too. But
but it should not replace
no, 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 no. You should
dedicated
have some
human
capability.
rights
Yeah,
expertise inside your company.
yeah, yeah, for sure. You want that knowledge base internally. So it does seem like the power has gone up on these roles, just or at least the importance. I say power, but it is. You've got to have some power to be able to create any type of change or change of behavior. Well, I thank you so much. I mean, I've learned so much from you. I think anyone who's, this podcast is designed for people that are either in this space or want to come into this space. I'm here for the movement. I'm here because I believe that these types of roles inside of companies are crucial. They're good for business. They're
Hmm.
going to make businesses run better. They're going to make the world run better. And we want to make sure that everyone that has a role like that or wants to get in this space is resourced well. And you've certainly provided that for anyone in this space. And I just thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely, anytime. I feel like I should write a book about this.
Okay, pre-plug. Come back on when you're ready to promote it, and we'll share it with the 20 people that listen to this podcast.
Will do.
All right. Thanks, too.
Thanks. Bye.
This is the one thing, the part of the show where we drill into one idea from our interview. Tu talked about prioritizing supply chain visibility, resilience, and supplier collaboration, and how her job as a human rights advisor is to essentially help companies from doing or not doing things that would hurt the business. Gartner just did a survey of 579, seems very specific, 579 supply chain practitioners across several different industries and geographies in order to pick what they believed would be the top driving forces on supply chains in the next 3 to 5 years. Well, no surprise here, artificial intelligence came out on top, named by 74 respondents. Interestingly, new ESG regulations and trade policies were cited by 67 respondents, followed closely by geopolitical fights and transition for power at a close 65%. Based on these findings, Gartner identified quote-unquote competitive characteristics of companies who will succeed in the coming years. These characteristics include, from the buzzword bingo game, agility, resilience, and integrated ecosystems. Sounds like consultant speak. These are the same characteristics that Tu advocates for inside of the companies she advises. As a matter of fact, anyone working in responsible supply chains is trying to drive more agility, more resilience, and more integrated ecosystems, more collaboration into the supply chain. Improving supply chain efficiency is ethics. and visibility is resilience. Don't believe the myth that businesses can't do good and do well. God, I'm tired of that. It's just a poverty of innovation and a poverty of imagination. Thank you for listening. Your time is so valuable, and please don't forget to subscribe.